Good morning to everyone. This is the continuation of the joint public hearing of the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Committee on National Defense and Security, Committee on Justice and Human Rights, and Committee on Finance, in reference to different bills on anti-terrorism, namely Senate Bill number 1134, authored by Senator Gordon, Senate Bill 1396, authored by Senator Honasan, 1715, authored by Senator Soto, and 1956 by this representation. First of all, I'd like to recognize the presence of the Chairman of the Committee on National Defense and Security, Senator Honasan. Good morning, sir. And also our resource persons, the Executive Director of the Anti-Terrorism Council, Florentino Manalastas Jr. Good morning, sir. You're the officer in charge. Okay, thank you. And then, of course, our resource persons from the National Intelligence and Coordinating Agency, Attorney Melanie Albores. Yeah, good morning. Attorney Roberton Lapus. Good morning. Attorney Jerome Reyes. General Marte Choco. Sir, puko mo rin sa harap. Join us. Attorney Manuel Llena. Yeah. And Director Candido Bontocon. Are you present? Yeah. Thank you. So, we also invited other resource persons from the Ateneo Human Rights Center. Unfortunately, they sent their regrets. Executive Director Maria Generosa Mislang, Alternative Law Groups, and Attorney Marwil Yasos of the Anti-Terrorism Program Coordinator, Institute of International Legal Studies. He has confirmed to attend, but apparently he's not yet. He's still on the way. Anyway, as mentioned during the last hearing, the Human Security Act passed in 2007 is seen as a dead-letter law. The only successful implementation until November 20, when Taguig Regional Trial Court convicted a certain Nur Sapian, the one who put up the Jabal Nur or Tiger Base Camp in Marawi. He was found guilty, but the three others who were likewise impleaded were acquitted. He was found guilty of rebellion in relation to Section 3 of the Human Security Act. Aside from that, the only successful implementation, as mentioned earlier, was the proscription of the Abu Sayyaf group as a terrorist organization. So, dalawa lang yung implementation ng Human Security Act. That is why there's a compelling need to really amend. Meron pa?
People of the Philippines versus June Guevara.
When was this?
Almost the same as in the prescription case.
Okay. So, yes, two convictions, yes, and sir, one prescription. Okay. But still, there's a need to amend the Human Security Act. Now, taking off from where we left off, or during the recent public hearing on October 1, attended by mostly our security and defense officials. Of course, the Attorney Yasos, magandang umaga po. In particular, also acknowledging the presence of the National Security Advisor, June Esperon. Good morning. Resource persons arrived at the concurrence to amend the following provisions of the Human Security Act. This is for the information of particularly Attorney Yasos. Ito po yung mga napagkasunduan, or hindi na napagkasunduan. Ito yung mga proposals by the security officials. Number one, yung redundant provision allowing the person being surveilled to have the right to be informed. Kasi it doesn't make sense to inform the person about to be surveilled. Number 2, the basis for and threshold in applying for an ex parte judicial authorization or the order to conduct surveillance, as well as preliminary asset preservation. Third, the period by which a suspected terrorist may be detained for the efficient and effective conduct of custodial investigation, and its proposed extension to up to 30 days. This is somewhat controversial. Fourth, the provision on false prosecution penalizing law enforcers at the high rate of 500,000 pesos per day in favor of terror suspects who are acquitted. This probably is one of the reasons why hindi successful yung implementation ng Human Security Act. So with that, let us begin. We received your position paper, which you may need to expound during this public hearing. So kindly, you have the floor, Attorney Llasos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Senator Lacson, and also to the Vice Chair, Senator Greg Honasan, Manoy. Yes, Your Honor, with all those points that have been agreed upon by the members of the intelligence community and the security sector, I give my full concurrence to all those, especially the penalization for false prosecution of 500,000 pesos. I think per day, I think that has to go because our prosecutors do not want to prosecute under the Human Security Act precisely because of that provision. So that is why we don't have successful prosecution for terrorism in this country. And what they do, I understand, is that the prosecutors would rather enter into plea bargain for other offenses punishable under the revised penal code. And it's all over terrorism. So I give my full concurrence for the removal of that provision in our law.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand, Mr. Chair, that there are basically two Senate bills proposing amendments to the Human Security Act, one by Senate President Vicente Soto III, and one by no less than the Chair himself. Considering that these two Senate bills touch on basically the same topics, and as I've read it, they are clearly identical except for some finer points. They can be best consolidated into just one bill. That is my humble view, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Also, the National Security Council Secretariat submitted some additional proposals. Kindly elaborate on your position.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, fellow panel members, good morning. Indeed, Your Honor, we submitted, but the main point would, which is not yet addressed, but which is being addressed, and we just want to emphasize, would be the deletion of the provision for the 500,000 a day penalty for wrongful arrests. Minus that, I think we will be more effective in carrying out our functions.
How about Nika? You have some additional proposals to make?
Your Honor, we have some additional proposals, although I may just state that we support in general some of the provisions that have already been tabled for discussion as contained in at least 2 or 3 proposed bills. These are our recommendations on the cancellation or suspension of passports for suspected terrorists trying to leave the country, the core data records to be provided to by the DIC through the DICT when requested by the ATC through the Secretariat on HVTs, high-value targets referring to terrorists. As well, the new ones that we would like to include point to the shutdown, possible shutdown of social media accounts in FB or Twitter accounts through the DICT. We also support the glorification provisions as contained in the bill sponsored by Senator Soto, but we would like to include actual acts, if this is possible, such as the posting of social media, liking, sharing, propagation of hate, and participation on ISIS websites. We also support the proscription as contained in the Lacson bill. And finally, we would like to state that we have a disagreement on the provision for making the ATC a commission. We feel that the ATC as it is constituted at the moment is currently sufficient for our purposes with a view to enhancing its current programs. In fact, the ATC is expected to issue a resolution defining 5 focus programs and specifying the lead agencies for these focus programs. The intention is to improve the management of the ATC as a whole and to promote coordination and collaboration among the member agencies, Your Honor.
Some questions. Yeah, there's a bill pending in the Senate, and I understand in the House they have already passed it on third reading. Ano, ito yung amendment sa RA 4200. Merong feature dito sa amendment sa Human Security Act dealing with the surveillance, ano, electronic surveillance. Would you prefer that we just incorporate this provision, those amendments sa 4200, kesa sa there's a special provision for anti-terrorism or the Anti-Terrorist Act as proposed. Sa amendment ng RA 4200, we are proposing that the RTC be authorized to issue judicial authorization for wiretapping. And when we are expanding the coverage, of course, including the safeguards, we are increasing the penalties for law enforcement officers conducting such surveillance in violation of existing laws or the law as proposed. 90 days ang period. Actually, 60, pwedeng magpa-extend ng another 30 days. And yung proceeds within 48 hours will be deposited to the RTC. And it is only through a court order that the product of such surveillance can be made or declassified. No. Sa Anti-Terrorist Act as proposed or bill as proposed, iba yung mga features because kayo rin yung nag-suggest. Yung features sa amendment ng RA 4200 sa anti-wiretapping will cover all equipment which science has not yet discovered. Ang nakalagay doon, pagka in the future na-discover ng science, masasama na doon. Kasi mabilis yung technology and we cannot just rely on the present technology. Sa RA 4200, ang covered lang doon, walkie-talkie, dictaphone, of course, landlines. Wala pa kasi yung because this is a 52-year-old law that has not been amended to date. No? This only, well, of course, I filed a bill way back in 2001, pero hindi ito nakakapasa. But now, it is a good chance of being passed by both houses of Congress. Now, I would like to ask your opinion kung ialis na natin dito yung sa surveillance portion and ma-incorporate na lang, ma-cover na lang doon sa amendment ng RA 4200. Ang i-include na lang doon because one feature is that not everybody can just conduct surveillance, electronic surveillance for that matter. It has to be cleared by the Chief of Staff, Chief PNP, Director General ng PIDEA, at saka Director ng NBI. We may include the Anti-Terrorism Council because sa feature dito sa bill, sa Anti-Terrorist Bill, kailangan i-clear ng Anti-Terrorism Council, di ba? So, pwedeng idagdag na lang doon sa proposed amendment ng RA 4200, yung clearance naman na kukunin from the Anti-Terrorism Council to cover yung agencies conducting surveillance in relation to terrorism or terrorist acts. Your view or your views?
Has in its wings all that would matter in terms of operations and policy making. We have there the PNP, Armed Forces, DOJ, Solgen, NSA, DILG. So everyone is there. Whatever will not be covered, specifically covered, as long as we put there the ATC, then we have enough flexibility. The Anti-Terrorism Council.
Yung OIC.
We are after a more effective law set to counter terrorism, and therefore if that will serve the purpose better than the draft, then we will agree that it be modified so that it will be more effective.
So you support the idea that it be incorporated in the amendment of the Anti-Wiretapping Act?
Yes, sir. So that we will not be looking at
Yes.
different, at so many laws. What will happen is that there will be a readily available law that will address this particular thing.
Attorney? Yes.
Sorry.
Other agencies are already specified, then let it be, so that they can have unilateral action on their part. After all, the actions of the intelligence community and law enforcement come to some sort of coordination at some levels, like for intelligence, National Intelligence Committee under NICA. For AFP and PNP, we have the AFP, PNP, APCIC, and operations. So, but when they are acting on their own and when they could act, then let it be that they could act on their own.
We can just include violations of the Human Security Act as amended later as a predicate crime. Kasi hindi kasama sa ano, di ba? So, yun na lang amendment na introduce doon, include as a predicate crime yung violation ng Anti-Terrorist Act, and of course include yung Anti-Terrorism Council do sa persons authorized to give clearance to the law enforcement agencies that will conduct the electronic surveillance. Yes, Attorney Llasos.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In fact, I agree with all those measures that are to be inputted in the amendment to Republic Act 4200. My view here is, while it can be there, but there's no stopping this committee or the Senate from incorporating the same provisions in our proposed amendments to the Human Security Act. Because my idea is the bill or the law itself must be user-friendly. In other words, any law enforcer who has a copy of the law itself will be guided accordingly. He doesn't have to go to the library or to Google search what is found or for cross-reference purposes. It has to be there. Because at any rate, I do not know the status, the legislative status of these bills. Baka mauna yung isa, mahuli yung isa. Might as well incorporate in our own bill itself so that we are guided accordingly, and if this passes nauna, then so much the better po.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Marwil, no? Maybe you are the most user-friendly among the resource persons. Looking over the proposed amendments, no? Your views on the matter, I was looking at our blind spots. No? Procedurally, sooner or later, we will develop a consensus on the needed amendments to the proposals. No? Now, countering terrorism is everybody's business. Now, referring to your statement that it should be user-friendly, the first battleground where we'll engage terrorism is the hearts and minds. And the first battleground is media, whether it's social media. Is there any proposal on the table for amendments, for refinement of the laws that can cover our public information system that will operationalize the observation that counterterrorism is everybody's business? It starts from ground level, from every esquinita, from every barangay, where we consolidate the information so that expeditiously decisions can be made at the highest possible level. Your views, Attorney Marvin?
Well, of course, this battle against terrorism must take the whole of society approach. And I am glad that the distinguished senator from Sorsogon mentioned about also involving the media and including, of course, the social media. That is why I would like to see a refinement on the provisions of our proposed measure regarding how we can, we can have norms by which, propaganda materials that are circulated on Facebook, on other social media, can be monitored or taken down. Maybe we have to look into also the Cybercrime Prevention Act, if we can be guided by it and learn from it, that can be inputted in our proposed legislation, Mr. Vice Chair. And with respect to the involvement of the community, especially at the barangay level, there are certain good practices under this present administration, especially with the fight against drugs, that involve the local government sectors, especially the barangay, especially when it comes to information gathering, in the barangay itself. For example, the barangay officials must really know who are their constituents. They must have a database of who are their legitimate residents, so that if they are able to see someone who they are not familiar with, at least they are already alerted that there is...
Yes. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I will intervene at this point, because the observation, even from where we sit, kayo nakakaintindi nito, is there is no street, no esquinita in this entire country where we do not know each other. We know each other, We know who the... alam natin kung sino yung lasenggo, may tinatagong paltik, papaputukin pag New Year. Alam natin kung yung mga pamilya na hindi nag-aaral yung mga bata. Let me translate it into operational terms. So may pagdalawang naka-standby sa kanto ng sari-sari store na hindi naman tigaron. Nagkakape for about 2 hours. So there must be a mechanism for addressing this. Like, we don't know if they are intelligence agents, they are riding in tandem, or they are politicians' bodyguards, or terrorists. So a mechanism must be developed at street level that will converge at some point so that reaction can be generated. And this goes all the way up to the level of the president. And I will ask that question later. So my question basically, Attorney Marvil, is from where you sit, your observations about the proposed bills, do we have such a mechanism in place, or do we need to establish a mechanism for that?
I think, Mr. Vice Chair, there is a need to provide for a concrete mechanism on that regard. That is one of the things that we have to improve on the proposed measure. Although, of course, these are already well-crafted bills, but there is still need for improvement, especially on the ground, as you mentioned. Because we should learn from the experience in Bohol, when there were Abu Sayyaf people, I think that was 2016 or 2017, if I'm not mistaken. It was the community who were able to detect them. And so we were successful in apprehending them. So really, there is a need for mechanism by which the community itself, through the barangays, must be involved.
At this point, Mr. Chair, if I may continue, is there any term or phrase in our legal, political, or social vocabulary that points to state-sponsored terrorism? Because for propaganda purposes, which is being highlighted in the media, what is highlighted is the abuses of government, no? Policemen, military, yun ang naka-highlight. And the idea, when it is propagandized by the traditional enemies of our democracy, is this, no? And I remember when Senator the Chair and I were in the service, there was such a thing as state-sponsored terrorism, if you go by technical terms. Is this still a prevalent perception in the counter-terrorism environment, or we are way past that?
My discernment on this, Mr. Vice Chair, is that we are already very much past that. No? In fact, the very definition of terrorism itself excludes that idea of state-sponsored terrorism, because here the intention of the terrorist is really to coerce the government to do an act. Why would the government be doing that to itself? It is precisely absurd. So I think that such concept at this point has already been relegated to desuetude. It's no longer current in the vocabulary, even in legal terminology, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes. Attorney Marvil, forgive me for I'm maximizing the opportunity to get an education. But we're talking only about the domestic environment. When you look at the global stage, no, there are some countries where the leader himself is classified as a terrorist. Can we relate this to the global stage, where cooperation, even in terms of information sharing, is supposed to be highlighted already, because terrorism doesn't recognize front lines and boundaries. Your comments, please.
My paradigm earlier, Mr. Chair, was with respect to the domestic front. But I am painfully aware that there can be governments that might be using terrorism against its own people or against other countries. We know for a fact that Afghanistan, when it sponsors terrorist organizations or groups, would fall under that category. Russia, well,
Turkey,
and Iran. Only those two that I am more prepared to state categorically, but with respect to the others, I don't have much information.
Final, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, no, we have to continue this conversation in another, maybe over a cup of coffee. June, let me jump from grassroots or ground level to the level of president. Meron bang mechanism tayo, June, na the president, the last document he reads before he sleeps, or the first document he reads before he has breakfast? Yung tinatawag na President's Brief. Yes, it's pinag-uusapan namin sa chair, no? It's a 1 or 2 pager that covers domestic and global issues, where he is able to develop the capacity to decide. Dahil ang crucial dito, no? When you address terrorism, walang araw at gabi rito eh. The president, one of the most powerful, not the most powerful among the remaining presidential democracies, no, should be able to translate this into expeditious action. May ganun ba tayong mechanism?
Your Honor, as in every commander, they have several sources.
Okay.
And they allow these sources to contribute to their daily updates. It's no different with the president, especially so that he has his way of going to other sources other than the sources in the armed forces, the military, as well as the national intelligence. On my part, I contribute what I call the president's situation brief, which is a contribution from the armed forces and the Philippine National Police, as well as from the media. But there seems to be some lag sometimes, because in reporting may not be timely, and the processing may not be as fast as we want. So that when the president reads them, it looks like they're already part of the newspaper, of the daily newspapers, because newspapers are fast and they don't even process their information. They simply print what they get from the reporters. In fairness to them, some are professional enough to check with other sources, but after one checking, go ahead, print it. Our deadline is 2 o'clock. So my information is more on the more studied ones, which I may provide him every week, every month, or whatever I think is important. For example, if the issue is the freedom of the free and open Indian and Pacific Oceans, then I'd like to think that I should give him updates on this. If I think the informations that he should give the attention to are on the West Philippine Sea. As chairman of the National Task Force on West Philippine Sea, then I give him updates on that. But as we know, the summaries of information simply come in every day from our operations in the armed forces and the AFP. It is up to him to have the time to do it. But I think on the overall, I think sometimes I think that he has even more information, like Marawi, for example. I would like to admit that I had a lot of hesitation in recommending him for the declaration of martial law, but he had several informations that he was getting being a Maranao. I mean, the grandma is a Maranao, and he has relatives in Marawi, so he knows.
On that score, no? So my question basically is, should we, harnessing the opportunity before us now, introduce such a mechanism so that it can facilitate whatever he knows, no? We have no control over that, no? But what I'm trying to drive at, Mr. Chairman, is to institutionalize the input of timely, complete, and accurate information so that our president, whatever he knows, we have no control over that, no? Can make rational, intelligent, no, informed, expeditious decisions. That's
Maybe on a regular basis, maybe on a daily basis. The POTUS receives an executive brief daily. No, that's the one of the first documents that he sees in the morning when he takes coffee. Are we practicing the same in the Philippines?
I don't think we could legislate that. It's operational. It really depends on the peculiarities of the end user, the commander, the president. But in regard to regular documents, like every year you should submit, the Director for National Intelligence submits a yearly report to the POTUS, for example. Then he does that as provided by law. The National Security Advisor also crafts the national security strategy for the president. So that comes out. But on a daily basis, I do not know if we could really legislate that.
Basically, it's something for us to think about. I agree with you, we cannot legislate that, no? That's why maybe it is more in the realm of executive action. My point is institutionalizing this to the point that it has been institutionalized in other more developed democracies, no? Para kahit sino ang presidente, that mechanism is available to him for continuity, for policy sustainability, for predictability. Para yung bureaucracy natin is not, subjected to the rigors of new president, new style, new policy, That's all I'm saying. But I'm glad to hear your thoughts on the matter.
We have no objection towards that, Your Honor. For example, we already have the National Security Council, but and the Senate President is a member of that, plus the committee the two committees are members of that. But the President still has the call on when to convene that. Otherwise, he simply convenes the Cabinet Cluster on Security, Justice, and Peace, or an executive committee. So, while we have the law that provides for the National Security Council to meet, the frequency simply cannot be legislated. the schedules come into the way.
Last point yun, no? You know, Senator Lacson and I have been trying to look at the overall. One time, we were talking to a resource person that is related to energy. He was in a restaurant facing his counterpart. Energy to, no? Strategic, specifically oil, no? When he asked his counterpart for a decision, my point really is expeditious decision-making. Umikot yung information from the counterpart all the way up to the highest levels of leadership in their country. Before they could order food in the restaurant, in 15 minutes, there was a decision. And we are talking about a powerful country. We'll discuss that privately later on. No? This is what we are up against. How much more terrorism? No? We cannot waste precious seconds. So I'm talking about expeditious decision-making, which we should equip our leader with. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, something for us to think about. I don't want to beat this issue to death and waste the time of the committee.
Mr. Chair, in relation to the bill, anything that would really expedite actions, not only of because terrorism, in the end, has to be a daily menu.
Yes.
So the president could not be on a daily menu with terrorism. He simply gives the guidelines. It just so happens that he really wants to be on the lead. Just imagine during the Marawi operations, he was there 11 times, and I could only catch up with him for 7 times. So, what do we learn from that? This is a leader who puts terrorism, drugs, on top of so many things. Not even the CPP-NPA is below that, if I may say so. But of course, I maintain that drugs is #1 law and order problem. But to me, the political problem is political threat is the other side. This the one we have been addressing since Palanan, since they tried to import to bring in so many grants and importings. Chinese made.
Better than the US importing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Also further the point raised by Senator Nasan, maybe what we're trying to inquire is if there is on a regular basis, not on a case-to-case basis, report submitted to the President that cover intelligence brief or daily activities, as long as it's on a regular basis, maybe on a daily basis, weekly basis, or monthly basis. But the point being raised by Senator Nasan is that to expeditiously assist the President in his decision-making, yung decision-making process para maging mas efficient, mas effective, and mas expeditious, baka kailangan merong daily brief, As I mentioned earlier, the President of the United States, yung POTUS, receives a daily executive brief. It's just a 1-page or a 2-page document that covers both domestic and international activities. Separate yung sa intelligence, separate yung sa operations, but he reads that every morning. Whether it's derived from newspaper clippings or output ng NICA, PNP, AFP, ISAF, merong at some point, magko-converge lahat yung information, merong quick analysis and validation, and then yung product will be submitted to the President on a regular basis. Kung hindi kayang daily, maybe weekly or monthly, to assist him in his decision-making process.
We want to work towards that, Your Honor. We have this facility that we call the President's Situation Room. And we want to have, we submit to him reports every 12 hours, actually. But the coverage is not as much as we want. We want to, it is only now that we have the national security strategy. We have been having some strategies before, but nobody dared to print it. It is only now that we have a national security policy, but we are not saying there was no policy before, but we printed it now. So we want to be more regular about things so that we know when to what to expect and when to expect from the agencies that will be working with us. For example, we don't even have a director for national intel yet,
Okay,
but we have a NICA.
John, okay, I'm not, I think Senator Lacson, the chairman, is on the same page, no? We're not talking about a paper brief, no? Maybe what I'm thinking about, I'm not implying anything, no, is a digital SAP bongo type na pag kailangan nyo yung information, nandyan. Okay? But it must be imaginative, out of the box, very dynamic. That's all we're suggesting.
I've been discussing that with General Rio, by the way. There will be, I think, we can really do it with the improvements. So before, it took me so many aides to do some jobs, but now tayo cellphone lang. Ang daming nawala na. But if I pass some information to Bong, by the way, I created several chat groups in Viber and WhatsApp. So, ito kayo, dito kayo sa grupong ito, dito kayo, dito kayo. But is that secure? I'd like to ask
I was about to say,
the ICT about that.
as long as it's fast, secure, and official. Di ba? Kasi kung hindi official, hindi recognized as official document or official report, then mahirap mag-pinpoint ng responsibility. Let's be specific, ano? Dos Palmas, nanggaling sa Palawan, di ba, pinasok ng Abu Sayyaf, nakuha yung mga hostages. Imagine how many hours they would travel by boat. And if there's a mechanism na makapag-communicate kagad sa Presidente, sa Commander-in-Chief, imagine how fast the President could have deployed all the units available between Palawan and Mindanao and Sulu. Probably, hindi na nakarating ng Patikul yung mga, or Basilan yung mga hostages. Sa dagat pa lang, na-intercept na. That's what Senator Nasen and I are trying to drive at. Ano? But it should be on a regular basis. More so, kung terroristic activities yung involved, or more important or more urgent activities that need immediate action. Yun siguro yung punto na, anyway, we're deviating a bit, but this is
Your
also
Honor,
related to...
That's something that is very close to us because from Carmen Cotabato, I was pulled out to Basilan for that and report to General Dominguez there. But I was wondering, how come from the time they took the hostages from Dos Palmas and they went by boat, slow by my standards, to Cagayan de Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, to Tawi-Tawi, then Hulu, then Basilan. Bakit din natin nakuha yun? Bulaga, nandun na lang sa Basilan. Those things I think are I don't know why Admiral Drabago at that time was the Westcom commander was not on top of the situation. Did he lack the equipment? Wala tayong unang-una, like today, we did not have drones, we do not have imagery satellite, we don't have fast boats. Perhaps all we had then were the Nomad of Westcom, which incidentally even crashed.
Yun, alam mo naman, minsan may mga officers na naghihintay ng guidance.
Okay.
So, which brings us back to that point na kung yung information immediately na ibigay sa Commander-in-Chief, and the Commander-in-Chief immediately ordered, di ba, the deployment of troops in consultation, of course, with the Chief of Staff or the Secretary of Defense, then probably, hindi nakarating doon sa Basilan yung mga hostages. Sa dagat pa lang, nagkaroon ng interception.
Mr. Chair.
the NICA?
Mr. Chair, may I just inform the body that as far as the intelligence community is concerned, we have this mechanism in place which has been there since a long time ago, and it has served the requirements of all previous presidents. We call this our daily intelligence brief. The daily intelligence brief is a conglomeration, inputs coming from the intelligence community, basically AFP, PNP, and all the others who support the NICA. We produce what is called as national intelligence on a daily basis, and this covers both domestic and foreign developments. We submit this in electronic form to the PSR, and the PSR, as cited by the National Security Advisor, is the one who picks up the most important items from this daily information that we provide them, and this in turn gets submitted to the President also on a daily basis. So the mechanism is in place, and there's also another complementary mechanism which is on a monthly basis. The Director General heads the National Intelligence Committee, and under the NIC, it meets monthly to discuss the most important issues for the month, and as necessary. So it means it can meet on a weekly basis if needed. And the outputs of this is also submitted to the President and to the National Security Advisor on a regular basis, depending on the requirements of both the President and the NSA. And may I also respond to an earlier point raised by Senator Nassan on the social media issue. I earlier mentioned that we wanted the DICT to be empowered and to have the authority to be able to shut down social media accounts through in the foreign, the Facebook, Twitter, and similar other mechanisms. And we are getting our inspiration from many other jurisdictions, like in India, they have this authority to really shut down Facebook or to ban any social media applications that it deems is going to be inimical to the national interest. And India, compared to the Philippines, has one of the bigger users of internet, and we are similar to India. I think the Philippines has a very huge number of users of internet, and this is a strong argument that will compel the these businesses, social media businesses, to comply or to comply with the requirements of the national security. For your information, Your Honor.
Yes,
May I just add to that? That is correct, Mr. Chair. All our intelligence, in the end, go to NICA. That is why I have been a proponent of strengthening NICA itself, compared as we compare it to the Director for National Intel. It is not only AFP, PNP, etc., but all the other agencies must coordinate, must give their reports to NICA for a centralized decision. The purpose there is for centralized decision making. As we all know, the Director for National Intelligence was established. The Directorate for National Intelligence was established after 9/11, because they were not CIA, FBI, they were not coordinating with each other. So the 9/11 thing happened as they found out.
Yeah, in addressing terrorism, Attorney Marwil, kindly help us out. Yung sa social media, yung giving them the authority to shut down or even ban, paano maganito sa freedom of expression?
I think, Mr. Chair, that what is paramount here is the police power of the state. Anything that is harmful or hurtful to the comfort, public safety, public order can definitely be regulated by the state. Because here, we are all aware that the social media has been used as a means of radicalization already. And the state has to preserve itself, no? And we don't have to wait for something to happen. And so I think that the police power of the state can be effectively invoked to sustain this provision in our bill if it is incorporated.
So, using natin wrong, Attorney, kung ma-incorporate yung proviso dealing with social media,
I think,
as long as we use the police power of the state in that context, ano, sa terrorism lang, sa, yeah.
because in fact, Mr. Chair, in even lesser offenses that is even allowed in the Cybercrime Prevention Act, may take-down provision nga doon ng National Bureau of Investigation. Kahit ma-cyber libel lang ako, mag-complain ako, pwede nilang imbestigahan, and if it's positive, they can take it down. How much more? We're talking here about, you know, national security, public safety. So all the more that it is allowed.
Mr. Chair, Attorney Marwil, please continue our education. In short, if you fall back on Article 3, anything that threatens life, liberty, and property will be resolved in favor of the state. Is that correct?
I think so, Mr. Chair, because here, there is clear and present danger of a substantive evil that the state not only has the right but the duty to protect the inhabitants. We don't want another Marawi to happen, no? And I think that this will be sustained even by the appropriate judicial authorities when a case is filed to challenge this provision.
Incomplete, inaccurate, or malicious information, how do you balance that out? No? Because, you know, alam mo naman, yung politicians, no? You never provoke an argument with somebody holding a microphone or a TV camera. Talo ka ron, no? Sa 6 o'clock news ba lang. So, is there any mechanism as it relates to the amendments, no, that can be incorporated para we can rationalize naman this relationship and we are not subjected to premature trial or conviction by publicity, as has happened many times in the past, not only to individuals, but to institutions, generating a weakening effect.
That is so true, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, that is happening. No? The media in the Philippines is very powerful. But I think that internally among themselves, they must have a code of ethics that they should really be following. But of course, we cannot legislate on their own code of ethics. But we understand that the media, they operate not as a matter of right, it's a matter of privilege. That is why they are given legislative franchise. And if in that franchise, it can be provided as a provision, especially you know, a provision that will require them to do balance reporting, especially with respect to issues like this on terrorism. I think that is doable, Mr. Chair.
Full circle tayo, going back to the question of the chairman, no? So, constitutionally, a shutdown is constitutionally defensible if we incorporate this into the proposed amendments.
Yes, Mr. Chair, as long as the parameters are there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
He's interested because he'll be the one to implement.
I put on record my congratulations to the distinguished senator from Sorsogon.
I heard the commission of appointments.
Attorney, another point, ano, yung ex parte judicial authorization on two aspects, ano, surveillance and asset preservation. It was discussed during the last hearing na distinct and separate dapat ito. Because sa asset preservation, merong existing law, yung sa anti-money laundering, na nagpipris, di ba, court of appeals. And there's a process. At saka mas mataas yung threshold, probable cause. Sa surveillance, we more or less agreed na wag naman probable cause. Kasi pag probable cause, necessarily, fiscal prosecutor level yun eh. So, reasonable ground to believe that the person, subject of surveillance or to be subjected to surveillance is about to commit or is committing acts of terrorism. So, your view, Attorney?
I think that is correct, Mr. Chair. A lesser threshold will do because really probable cause is different from reasonable ground. And probable cause talagang may mga kasuhan ang nangyari dyan. Dito lang naman, this is still in the level of policing. No? So I think the lesser threshold would suffice.
Anyway, the check and balance will come from the judge himself who will issue the judicial authorization, di ba? He will determine if the reasonable ground on the part of the law enforcement agent applying for the judicial authorization is valid or not, di po ba? So, thank you.
Besides, Mr. Chair, this is comparable to the application for search warrant. It is also ex parte. No? So, it's still the judge that has the final say whether or not the relief prayed for would be issued.
Mr., what can you contribute?
As consultant of NIGA and ATC, I can only add to the comments of the representative of NIGA. Yung issue kanina na the provision on surveillance of communication to be transferred to the 4200. Okay, but itong nakikita ko yung CDR, call data record, baka wala dun eh. Kasi in the crafting of the anti-cybercrime law, sa proposal, andun yung CDR eh, pero nawala doon sa final form. Baka dito sa 4200, nawala rin. Doon sa proposal ni Mr. Chairman, nandun yung CDR eh. Because the core data record, kasi importante ito sa terrorism, yung impending and imminent terrorist threat. Walang time yung investigator and security forces to act on the communication intercepted. So, other countries na-identify nila two characteristics of communication. The content itself, or the message, and the call data record, or billing data. Walang interception dito eh. Nasa record dito ng telcos eh. Sa Australia, the Minister of Communication can require the telco to give or provide the call data record to investigator. So wala nang probable cause or reasonable ground and strong evidence. Australia and US na-identify na nila ito, yung CDR and content. Importante kasi sa investigator yung call data record eh. Doon na-trace yung mga who called who, what time, how often. So, walang interception ito. It is after the call. Walang So, sa kanilang telecommunication law, wala nang court order. Wala nang warrant. Thank you.
Already included in the mandate. Anyway, Attorney Will mentioned kanina, there's no harm naman if we include these provisions and more. Pwede expanded pa nga eh, pagdating sa Anti-Terrorist Act, parang more areas covered than the amendment sa RA 4200, and there's no harm in doing that. So yeah, more or less we're agreed na isama na lang din natin yung sa surveillance portion doon sa amendment sa 4200.
Mr. Chair, I want to go with the indulgence of this committee to a point before I forget. This is with respect to the bill filed by Senator Honasan, Your Honor, regarding penalizing membership in terrorist organizations. I checked, Mr. Chair, the draft Senate bills, both of Senate President Tito Soto and of the chair of this committee. I would like to propose, Mr. Chair, that the Senate Bill number 3096 of Senator Honasan be incorporated as a section in Senate Bill 1715 and 1956 if they are incorporated. I noticed that in the Soto bill, there is no provision regarding penalizing membership on terrorist organizations, because immediately after Section 5C, which is about recruitment to terrorist organization, it only penalizes recruitment but not membership. So the bill of Senator Honasan can be incorporated therein as Section 5D, and a corresponding adjustment should be made. But I noticed that in the bill of the chair, Senate Bill 1956, there is a provision on Section 8, second paragraph, about voluntarily and knowingly joining in the organization. So there is a provision regarding membership in terrorist organization. I would propose that the provision of Senate Bill number 3096 of Senator Honasan be incorporated therein, because I think that the definition here is even more comprehensive, and there are mechanisms like the period of detention. So with the indulgence of this committee, that is my humble submission, to incorporate Senate Bill 3096.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney. Noted. Well taken, and thank you very much.
One more point, Mr. Chair, regarding the Senate bill filed by Senator Dick Gordon, Senate Bill number 1134, regarding declaring a state of national emergency against drugs and terrorism. Initially, I was reluctant to support this bill, but when we conducted our own hearing, committee meetings in the UP Law Center, we had resource persons like Professor Banlawi of UP. He was able to confirm and in fact published a research or a book connecting dangerous drugs with terrorism. And so now I put on record my support to this bill.
Thank you, Attorney. I think we've covered a lot already, unless Senator Nasan. So with that, we can, more or less, I think we can submit a committee report for deliberation in the plenary. So kung meron kayong additional inputs, kindly submit na lang subsequently or parang addendum sa inyong mga position papers na sinabit. So with that, I think we can adjourn this committee hearing, this public hearing. And yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I put on record a proposal for the resource persons, that proactively you can think of other mechanisms that will not be covered by the matter at hand, like what we dealt with earlier, the mechanisms for expeditious decision making, wherever that will fit. Because on the ground, ang dynamic doon is mabagal talaga ang decision making. We have inflicted on ourselves, especially our law enforcement agencies, a terrible bureaucracy. Yung sinabi ni Chair kanina, yung sa Dos Palmas, that was a wasted opportunity to save lives. 6 hours in biyahe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I just respond to the Senator Nasson's statement? One of the reasons why the ATC would like to come up with a new resolution is precisely to address your concern about mechanisms, because we also believe that the ATC, as it existed for some time, lacks in terms of a lot of things, and one of this is that there's no focus, and that is why we are trying to put new focus programs. We've identified 5 focus programs and identified the responsible lead agencies for this. Hopefully, this will lead to the crafting of new mechanisms that would ensure that information and issues are expeditiously addressed and expeditiously made known to policymakers, not just the President.
On that score, Tony Lapus, no? Tony Lapus. Terrorism will be with us for some time.
Yes.
Now, I pray to God that the learning curve of the terrorists will not be better than our learning curve. Okay, we must, for the sake of our people, be 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps ahead. And dyan naman tayo magaling yung mga Pilipino. Being proactive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Your Honor, and we are also enlisting the support of our respective counterparts abroad, because we're trying to learn from their own experiences in dealing with the problem of terrorism. Thank you, Your Honor.
Attorney Marvin.
Before I forget, Mr. Chair, also another input that we can improve on the Senate bills against terrorism is on terrorist financing. I reviewed the provisions. There's only about banking, but there's also the informal remittance na hawala, and then soon, Senator Nason, if he would be with the DICT, yung smart padala and others, so wala pa po tayo doon. So I'll just undertake to submit my comments regarding this to the committee for further inputs.
Mr. Chair, ito problema, Attorney Marvin, no? Every time you provide an input, it generates another question. No? I forgot to mention that part of institutionalizing our efforts against terrorism is insulating it from partisan politics. Sometimes, as Attorney Lapus said, not to imply anything, no? But we were at a standstill, okay? Because even our counter-terrorism efforts were politicized in a very partisan manner. And I hope that will not happen. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we'll just await the submission of further suggestions. Sige. So with that, we will end this, we'll adjourn this public hearing, and thank you very much for your inputs.
Sitahin mo muna ang papa mo dahil nag-agree sa dito sa planong to. Tuloy mo yan. Tumigil na yung pakikialam ni Daniel. Elias, inamin mo ang salang pagpatay kay Brent Evangelista. Dahil dyan, ikaw ay sinasampahan ng kaso na robbery with homicide. Patay mo sa Daniel.
And long-lasting bango. Ang vitaminized lactose-free plus, nilulok na may 3 grams pa. Lactose-free plus for your Bibo kid that may help develop his brain immunity at once. Ibang level na Bibo Kid! Available in supermarkets, drugstores, and Lazada. Ang kilo-kilo, di pwedeng white lang. Dapat dry and fresh din. New Rexona Roll-On. Now in a whitening formula. Get drier, fresher, whiter underarms. For Kilikili Gold, use Rexona. Also with Cleo Lotion.
Na 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 na. Isna na, uy alam nyo na. Siyempre na, bakit nyo na? At sabihin, may pasta and mixes na or baby pa-morning. We're making good cheer, our buying meal is here. Share a very Merry Christmas season. Have a very Merry Christmas season. Bucket meal from KFC. Oh, yeah. Uy, pasto na! May new flavors at Selecta!
Rich Choco Hazelnut Crinkles. Yummy Buko Salted Egg con Queso. And creamy Buko Pandan Especial.
Ano regalo ko?
Ngayong Pasko lang to.
Working outside is so hot and sticky. And that means frizzy hair. Fight the frizzies with Palmolive Silky Straight. It's specially formulated to help give you straighter hair na natural ang bagsak. Use Palmolive Silky Straight. Have a great hair day! When you took a chance, you were already great to me. I nourish your greatness by helping to list all 8 signs of brain development. with precious MFGM and the highest levels of DHA. Enfagro A+4.
Let's go!
Adin!
Mami, hang infection yan.
Infection? Ano yun?
Isa yan sa inaaral ng PAMIT. Gamit ang germ finder na ito, makikita natin na pati hangin may dalang germs na pwedeng maging sanhi ng skin infection or hang infection. Kaya gamit namin, Safeguard. Unlike regular beauty soaps, Safeguard provides 24-hour germ protection. Basta germs, Safeguard! Let's go!
As moms, we know our kids need to start each day with a good breakfast. That's why I choose bread and Nutella, made of premium hazelnuts and a hint of cocoa. They're happy, and I'm happy. They're ready to start the day. Bread and Nutella, the tasty way to start your day.
Banjo po ng pantasangpinoy.com.
Let's oversee NTC because the sole selection lies on NTC as per law. No other body can grant the frequencies and CPCN except
The claim, Secretary, I'm sorry, the claim is that the NTC or the selection committee cannot alter or change the terms of reference. So my question will be this: if they cannot do so, who is authorized to?
As I said, ma'am, there was no alteration at all. Not a period, not a comma was changed from the final version until it became effective by law on October 4.
Pero di ba sabi nila, 10 months nila po itong ginawa, di ba? Okay. So yung sa 10 months po ng Secretary, sino po ang nagtulong-tulong para gawin yung mga terms of reference na yun?
It was a result of so many public forums, public hearings.
Correct.
Some of these our colleagues are present. No? In fact, they inputted some of the wordings in the terms of reference.
Okay. Maybe PTNT, you can explain this.
Yeah.
Kasi the terms of reference are already done. Now, who has